Hi class. Today I am going to go over my PowerPoint slides of the elements of fiction. And on this page I also have a copy of the PowerPoint slides so that you can go and access them from Google Docs. So this is called the elements of fiction. And let me just start this and we'll get going. So what is fiction? Fiction stories are not real. They are made-up stories by authors who create situations to look like they are real, but the actual situation of the stories have not really happened. So a fiction piece of writing is a story that's not real at all. It's totally 100% made up, and it's called fiction. So the first part of a fiction story, of course, all of you know this from going to movies or reading books, is called a plot. A plot of a short story is the series of events. Since the plot is the basic storyline, it is up to the reader to notice what events are going on in the plot. A plot in a short story or novel is important to the understanding of the whole piece of writing. When students are asked to write a summary of a story, they are generally asked to discuss the main parts, the sequence of events that run through a plot. A plot can have a number of sequences of events depending on the length of the story. A good way to focus on a story and what is happening is to draw a timeline of a sequence of events in the story. A story is usually told in chronological order. However, some authors do play around with the sequence of events and begin a story from the end and move to the beginning of the story. So the plot is the basic storyline, and it is very, very important to the understanding of what is going on. It is usually the plot that catches us or loses our interest of a story. We either like the plot or we don't like the plot. So the plot has the following components. For those of you who have taken my English 101 class or my English 1A class or my previous classes, I've talked about this, but we're going to look at it in much more detail in English 102. So it starts with the exposition, which is like the beginning of the story, and then you have something called a rising action. The rising action is where things start to bubble up in the story and it gets kind of interesting for us. The story will hit what is known as a climax. That's like a turning point in the story. And then it comes down to what is known as falling action, and then the resolution is made. So that's the basic components of a plot. So when you're reading a book or you're reading a story, you should know at what point you are. Are you at the climax? Are you at the falling action? Are you at the resolution? And when you are talking about a plot of a story, you should be talking about the climax, the conflict, the rising action, the exposition. You should be talking about these things. You should be using this language as you are explaining the plot of a story. So the next part is called point of view. Stories are told from different points of view. A single event can be told by different people, and that single event and what point of view the story was written. A story is generally revealed through the eyes of the narrator. The narrator can be a character in the story, or the role can be to a neutral party observer. So stories are told from different persons. It could be told from the first person or the third person. It could be the objective third person, the limited third person, or the omniscient third person. Many of you are familiar with a lot of stories that are written in the omniscient third person, or sometimes the first person, which is a narrator, a character in the story. The Great Gatsby is told in the first person from the narrator, who is actually in the story, and Nick is the person who's actually narrating the story. But oftentimes books are told in the omniscient third person. It's just an easier way for authors to tell a story. Characters help to move a story's plot. A character can be a single person, an animal, or an object. The character is revealed through action and dialogue. Dialogue is used by an author to reveal a character's thoughts and plans, or actually also their characteristic. When a reader is developed well, when a character is developed well, a reader's interest in the story increases. So if you really are familiar with this character and that character resonates with you, then you're really interested in the story. Readers are curious about what happens to the character in the story. It motivates them to finish a story. A reader may identify with a character because he or she has had a similar experience, or a reader may have a fantasy to be like the character he or she is reading about. The important point to remember is that the character in a story must develop a relationship with the reader in order to have a feeling for the character. It is that feeling that keeps a reader interested in reading what happens to a character. So if you don't really like the character, even if the character is a good character, doesn't do anything bad, but you don't care about the character, it's highly unlikely that you're going to want to read on in a story. So one of the things that I want you to start looking at when you're reading the short stories for this chapter is I want you to think about the characters. Are you interested in them? Are you not interested in them? Do you find them to be intimidating? How do you find the characters to be? Of course, when you're taking a class and you have to read a book, then you're kind of stuck with the character. I remember many years ago, I had to read books that I didn't like the characters. And when I didn't like the characters, it was really hard for me to finish a book. But I had to continue finishing a book. One of them that comes to my mind is Wuthering Heights. And I just hated that book. If you like that book, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to insult you, but I personally hated that book. And what I found, I know I'll never go back to rereading that book. I got through it, but I just didn't like the characters. I didn't like the people. And they were not dislikable enough for me to want to know about them. I didn't care about them. But it was an interesting thing to experience, because once you know what you don't like, you know not to revisit it in the future. Okay, so there's different types of characters. There's a protagonist, which is the main character. There's an antagonist that goes against the main character. There are round characters who are very complex and has many details. And there's the flat character, which is the opposite of a round character. And then there's also indirect characters. They may not have much to do with the main character or the antagonist, but they're just there to fill up part of the plot. Some authors use characters to fill the plot in. And sometimes some authors include indirect characters because there's a variety of experiences that the protagonist may be going through. Then the next element of a story is called the setting. The story is the context in which the story takes place. The context is the details that are going around in the plot, such as the time, date, and place. The setting is not always revealed directly to the reader, and it's up to the reader to look closely at the story to notice all the details about the setting. Oftentimes, the setting is created to give mood or tone to the story. The setting also helps establish the important elements of what is going on in the story. Some of the things that you should be asking yourself are, what time of the year is this story taking place? So if you hear about snow, then you know it's going to be in winter. Where is the story taking place? It could be in a restaurant, it could be in a house, it could be on a hilltop someplace. So where is it? When is the story taking place? Is it the 1920s? Is it taking place in this particular era? Is it in the morning? Is it in the evening? So when is the story taking place? There's a little short film here that I have that you can watch it. It's called A Worn Path, and you can ask yourself questions about that story. You can watch the PowerPoint slides. I'm not going to go over it, but that's The Worn Path. So to wrap up, the elements in fiction help you as a reader to break down the different areas in a story to help you for your understanding, as well as bring to life a series of events that have never taken place, but could have taken place or may in an actual setting. The most important part of fiction, that it's all made up to look real. So fiction is not real. It's all made up. It uses the author's imagination, and the characters and the situations and the setting and the place are all made up. We examine literature to get a message or an idea about a situation or a person who we have never met or have never seen. Stories and the people in them help keep our imaginations alive with thoughts that reveal who we are. So when we're reading fiction in this chapter, that's what we're doing. We're looking at the author's imagination and seeing what the author is trying to say. So that's my wrap up. And yes, you can take a link, click on the link to the actual PowerPoint slides, and you can print them out if you like, and you can watch the previous slide, The Warm Path, which is a story written by Eudora Welty that you can watch. All right, bye.